Hey everybody, we're live and I am beyond happy to announce my friend has returned, Rick Gates, former deputy campaign manager with 2016 Trump campaign. And I think a lot of you know his background, so I'm not going to bother to recite that part. However, I will uh, basically get rid of the many versions of him that are open because I was tweeting things out. How you doing, Rick?
Great to see you, Zennie. How are you?
Great. Awesome, man. Awesome. Hey, let's get right to it. For what the heck happened to us Democrats from your perspective? Let's just lay it right out there. Lay it on the line.
Yeah, look, I think from a higher level view, when you're in presidential campaigns, the two things you look for are a dynamic candidate and a resonating message. And that candidate's got to be able to deliver the message. So before we even get into the demographics and what happened, if you don't have those key ingredients, then it usually doesn't bode well for a campaign. And in my opinion, I don't think Kamala Harris was able to, check those boxes. And I don't think she was able to connect with the voters. I think there was an authenticity issue. And I think what's been interesting about this is not kind of a Republican argument versus Democrats. I've had a number of Democratic colleagues say, look, I mean, she just couldn't define herself early on. Now you can point to the fact that she had less time to do it. However, she was vice president for 3.5 years, before that. So I think, when you start at that level, you have to break down, those fundamental building blocks. And then when you do that, you can kind of see what happened from an election day point of view. And that's when we'll get into why couldn't she connect with the demographics. So she couldn't. So she lost Hispanics, 45%. She lost, the youth. It's interesting because usually you can only point to one or two things, and there's not an array of things like there is in this election. I mean, honestly, I'm still kind of sitting back and watching the Democrats, go at each other and listening to their opinions and their thoughts on ultimately what led to her demise. But it was a series and combination of things that I think overall to the belief that the American people just did not trust her vision over Donald Trump's. It doesn't mean they like Donald Trump any more than Kamala Harris. It's just at the end of the day, when you go into that polling station and make that decision, it's usually about what's best for me. And clearly, most Americans felt that Donald Trump is going to help me get back to where I want to be more than Kamala Harris.
I got to ask you, because my friend Van Jones and I were going at this. Was Van wrong in pushing Kamala when I wanted either Biden? I thought it was going to be Gavin Newsom, my friend since '98. So you'll straighten me out. What do you think? How should we?
Look, that's kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking. I mean, if Kamala Harris had won, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So I think there are a lot of things. I do think that the Democrats hurt themselves by not really having enough time to define Kamala Harris. I think that's one. If she had done a better job defining herself earlier, I don't think it would have been as much of an issue. Obviously, the Democrats are saying, look, if Joe Biden had stayed in, he probably would have had a better chance at beating Donald Trump. I honestly don't think so. When you looked at the polling numbers and how much they eroded, even though Kamala Harris dropped in a lot of areas that Joe Biden had beaten Donald Trump in 2020, the opposite's true. Kamala Harris actually gained in territories that Biden didn't. So I think that's really hard. Now you get into the others. Gavin Newsom has a lot of baggage, as you guys know better than I do, from California. I think the more interesting person that people are asking is about Josh Shapiro. And certainly if she had at a minimum picked him as her VP, would we also be having a different conversation? And I do think there's more merit to that given Josh Shapiro's popularity in Pennsylvania and what a key battleground state that was. He could have possibly swayed some of those voters in Michigan and Wisconsin and prevented that hemorrhaging in the Rust Belt states for her.
So I got to ask, because I'm a huge junkie of presidential politics going back to 1969. And my buddy John Russo and I used to have these shows and talk about it. And we talk about moments in history. And of course, there's, Nixon and Kennedy and the sweat on the brow and everything else, right? If you have to look back at moments that would make history or we won't forget with respect to this campaign, what would they be?
Yeah, for me, if there's two for Kamala Harris, the first was not picking Josh Shapiro. I think that people will analyze that, and I think that would have had a profound impact on the race. Two was her interview with The View when, for the first time, when she was asked, what would you do different from Joe Biden?
Yeah,
man, that was a softball question, and I've heard more Democrats raise that interview and the fact that she couldn't name one thing. And common sense would tell you if you just named one or two, it puts you in a different light. I mean, that immediately did what Republicans were trying to do with some success, but the Democrats, or she certainly helped us in that case, and that is linking herself to Biden. And, I will say on election night when CNN put out an exit poll about 5 o'clock, and they had 3 questions. The primary question is, are you happy with the direction of the country? 72% combined said they were either dissatisfied or angry. And I knew right away Donald Trump was going to have a good night, because that would then be reflected in the voters, and who they voted for.
And that gets me to something that you wrote in your great book, Wicked Game, which I recommend everybody get, folks. And I took this segment, so I want to make sure I read it. We wrote this. Now, keep in mind, folks, Rick wrote this after the 2016 campaign, after he went through his unfortunate series with the law and everything, which I don't want to recount for this, but out of respect for your future and everything else and a lot of things have done. But you did write this, and I think it's incredibly prescient, for want of a better term. Okay. And you wrote, Donald Trump has forever changed the political landscape of the United States of America. He has utilized skills learned over decades in business and transformed them into political tools that have enabled him to galvanize supporters and soundly beat establishment politicians on both sides of the political aisle. And it seems no matter how hard he punches or how hard his opponents try to knock him down, he always winds up on top. No matter which side you happen to be on, you continue, there is one truth we need to all grasp. Donald Trump isn't going away. And the impact of his actions, his words, and his style of winning will continue to impact this country and the world for decades to come, if not more. Whether we want to understand Trump as a means to learn to survive and thrive in the world in which he operates, whether we want to reflect him or defeat him, we first have to understand him, how he got elected, how he wins, how he challenges the media. You could have written that yesterday.
I wish I could have put a bet on it in 2016, and it would have had a great payout today.
And guess what? Now you can bet on elections, right? So what about that? Because as a guy who was a fan of The Apprentice and expected a different Donald Trump than we got, since 2016, and who tried out to be on The Apprentice, all right? I thought the Donald Trump that I knew was the guy that pushed the product, that had the mantra that he repeated again and again and again. And when I read what you just wrote, I think back to that Trump, and I realize he's taken a lot of those strategies and indeed did bring them to politics, and they work. Why do they work? Dumb question, but why do they work?
So in 2016, I think there was a prevailing tone in America on all parties, including independents, that they were frustrated with politics and politicians. And normally in a presidential cycle, you have a governor, you have a senator, that kind of comes up through the ranks, and in their view, nothing really changes. And with Donald Trump, it was the advent of somebody that nobody expected. Think about it. This guy had never run for a single political office before running for the presidency. That alone is just phenomenal. But the way he did it, the way that he attacked both parties, his own party, he has an instinct that I always said was unparalleled. And, you know, again, personality aside, totally different subject. There are people that like him, people that don't. It's the way that he approached politics in a way that had never been done before. And it's a combination of his media prowess and just resiliency, which gave him tremendous ability to communicate with the voters. It's the idea that he pounded in everybody around him that I don't need consultants, I don't need third parties, I can communicate directly with the people. That alone, you know, the authenticity factor, I think, was important then and important now, and it's been fascinating over the last few days. The most asked question I get is, how is Donald Trump different in 2016 than he was today in this race? And he's not. I mean, what you see is what you get, and you saw in this campaign, he went from extremes of being laser focused on policy issues to going off script in the rallies. Just as he did in 2016. Some people would argue even more so. But I think if you looked at the way that he communicated with people, connected with people, the rallies this time around, same style, same presentation, ultimately bigger, and obviously did more of them. Again, those are his tools. We didn't come up with these things. I mean, these were kind of his ideas, and he would lay it out. I want to do X, Y, and Z. We would say, no, that's not a good idea. And of course, he would still do it, and we would be wrong the majority of the time. But I really do think that if you take his personal experiences and apply them in a political world, it's a phenomenon that we haven't seen. Maybe Reagan was close in terms of the communication factor, but even Reagan, I think a lot of people would argue, was a politician. Maybe not to the extent that some of them are, like John McCain, Mitt Romney, Obama, and others. But Donald Trump was far from that model. And it was interesting because I thought in 2016, it was, a surprise win. This was a resounding win in 2024. Yeah. And I was curious to see how the people would react to Trump and whether or not they would view him through that same lens. And they did. But I think the filters were much more intense this time versus 2016.
Having said that, I have to ask you, why does it seem that President Obama and President Trump basically attract the same kind of people? They have the same reaction. They're not dissimilar. Why is that?
Look, they're both very charismatic, right? Obama, at the time that he ran, represented, again, I think, something that Americans wanted, right? They wanted a youthful candidate. They wanted somebody that was vibrant. And he, back when he ran, I mean, he checked all those boxes. It's a very, you're absolutely right. It's a very similar contrast to what Donald Trump was able to do. I'd say the difference when Barack Obama ran is he still was a politician in large part. And he didn't really attack, the Democratic Party as much, where Trump attacked the Republican Party quite extensively. We talk about, I think, an important distinction back in 2016 and today is the MAGA movement versus the Republican Party. And a lot of people use the Republican Party to capture both. I think that's wrong. It doesn't do justice to what Donald Trump has been able to create. And it poses, I think, a fascinating question moving forward. Was the results from this election, was it an anomaly, only unique to Donald Trump? Or can another Republican candidate down the road capture these sorts of same demographics and voters that Donald Trump, did? Obviously, we'll have to wait. Time will tell. But I'm very curious to see if that MAGA movement is going to be able to be transferred to other Republican candidates down the road.
And going forward with that too, I remember when I was covering the 2012 Democratic National Convention in Charlotte, and I couldn't get over, and I just have to say this, I could not get over the degree to which I thought Cory Booker and Kamala Harris were really more trying to be or capture what they thought Obama had. Rather, they really formed their own message. Yeah. What say you about that?
I totally agree. And I think that's where you see Donald Trump being distinctively different. And look, there are pros and cons, but I think what the American people saw in Donald Trump in 2016 is what they would like to see in all candidates, regardless of party, and that is authenticity. And I think from a political point of view, politicians don't necessarily want to be authentic because they feel the need to protect their image. And so they aren't, they come across as different people when they're campaigning versus, behind the scenes. John McCain was a great example. He had a style of campaigning behind the scenes. He had a very angry temper, that people would, always discuss. And you could go through each candidate has one. With Donald Trump, again, he was no different than what you saw, than what I saw behind the scenes. He would, he would yell, he would, praise, he would, be reflective, he would be frustrated. And there's that quality. I don't think you can, you can learn. It's innate, and he had it. And like I said, there were plenty of times when it was valuable, but there were also times where that authenticity got him into trouble. And largely why a lot of voters were had a difficulty with his personal attacks and attitudes sometimes versus his policies. And we talked about it in this election cycle. In a grand scheme of things, Donald Trump should have won this election by a landslide, right? He kind of, being the even though he had already served as president, he wasn't incumbent. It's always easier not to be incumbent. You can attack, you can criticize the current policies, especially in this case when they weren't good. But so it's just a different style between Donald Trump and every other politician I've seen. And I think what's interesting is you can see the effect he's had on a lot of the down ballot races. Like in 2018, 2022, there were a lot more, I'd say, authentic candidates. Again, they got themselves into a little trouble and hot water sometimes, but there was, I think, this desire, and I hope it continues, that American voters just want real people. And I think that was a real issue for Kamala Harris's cycle. She just couldn't sell it.
Yeah. Hey, are you thinking about Mark Robinson when you say yeah?
There you go, man. Look, as we both know, it goes both ways. It can happen on both sides at any day. I have to tell you, I'm actually surprised he got as much of the vote as he did, to be honest with you. I think that in part is Donald Trump's coattails in North Carolina. But that was the surprising item in that race for me.
In a weird kind of maniacal way, I was hoping he'd win just to see if that formula worked.
I mean, Donald Trump has, right? I mean, everything that he had to
like,
carry through the years.
Hey, folks, if you know what we're talking about the gentleman ran for governor in North Carolina, and was lieutenant governor, but was found to have, I don't know if this has actually been proven beyond a fact or not, I didn't look that deeply into it, but that he supposedly made some comments that were on a site that is for porn reasons. He says he didn't, but the bottom line is that he got burned for it. And do you think he lost because of that, or he just lost because for other reasons? It just wasn't.
No, I think he lost absolutely because of that. Look, Stein was very popular in North Carolina. I think it would have been a much tighter race. What we saw in all the battleground states and other states as well is Donald Trump polled 5, 10, even higher points ahead of the down ballot candidates. And when you see that, that is a clear indication. And Texas was a great example. Look how close Ted Cruz and Aldred were all throughout the race, to the point where Aldred was up by 1 point, 1.5 points moving into election day. And the only reason, in my opinion, that Ted Cruz got reelected is because of Donald Trump's coattails. And I think that's, exactly probably why Mark got as much of the vote in North Carolina as he did. It was because of Donald Trump.
Hey, help me, because blacks down here in the South, some think, this is a disaster, we're in trouble, he hates us. What's the real story from your perspective regarding Donald Trump? And my thought, frankly, was that, he's mentioning all this stuff about the Central Park 5, he's going to crash and burn, it's going to be, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. And yet it was almost like, And my personal theory was maybe people don't really take him seriously on this sort of thing, or what. I'm still trying to process what happened there because, well, I am. Help me out with that from your perspective. How do you see it, and how do you think other people should take a look at it?
Look, I think, again, there are instances where I've seen Donald Trump communicate thoughts, but he does it in fewer words. And I think that gives the media in particular and people that are his detractors an opportunity to attack him for not fully clarifying, a position as an example. I got to tell you, in all my personal time traveling with him, working with him, never saw any instance that rose to the occasion, that you're referencing. Not one. And you'll hear other people say it as well. Again, that's kind of, does he have those tendencies? I personally don't think so. I never saw it. Maybe other people, say he does. But if you look at kind of the proof is in the pudding, and you look what he's done for the Black community, for Latinos, and then you compare that to Obama, right? I've had more, Black Americans tell me that Obama was such a huge disappointment because here is an opportunity for him to really make inroads and help those in the Black community, and he did the least. Now, I'm sure that's a topic for debate. Other people would have different opinions. And I'm just telling you what I've heard from people in the Black community that I've talked to in multiple states. And I think that's kind of telling, and again, in my interactions with Donald Trump, when he said he wanted to help people, he wants to help people. Like when he's making these promises to the Black community, Latinos, other demographics, to, cutting taxes, stopping inflation, cutting immigration, kicking people out of the country. He's going to do all those things. Now, how he does them, how fast he's able to do them, the details do matter. But I've always said this, he would rather be wrong than change his position on something, because he always felt changing looked like you were flip-flopping, and it looked like you were weak. And even if you were wrong, you could explain that to people. But he was going to move forward with the agenda that he said he was going to deliver for the American people, both in 2016 and today.
I want to share with you from an observation I don't think is going to hit home with a lot of folks, but it was mine, and it was a feeling. And first of all, I was one of the first to sign on to BarackObama.com, which was a unique, as you know, social media site, right? And what I realized was that America was a lot more integrated than we were being led to believe at the time. And that's why I believe we were going to clobber Hillary Clinton. I was just sold. Okay. And the beauty that I discovered is that when Barack won, Black Enterprise had a photograph of the African Americans that worked in the White House. And for the first time, Rick, we could spot people that we knew or were friends, and we had a connection. We had a power connection. Now, I know that to someone who doesn't think that way or doesn't aspire or is just simply trying to get by and they think that's never going to be me, it doesn't mean anything. But to somebody like me who went to Texas Arlington, went to Cal, got his master's degree, and worked for 5 politicians, and you always think of yourself as desiring to be in that area in some kind of way, that was magical. And it was magical to be able to have those connections. So it improved my self-esteem, frankly. Those are a lot of folks I knew who of color, because we finally felt like, hey, look, and I remember in the inauguration, for the first time, I saw folks that looked like me, Black guys, waving the flag. And I've always been super patriotic from the time I was 9. I was actually a Nixon fan, pissed my mom off. And so, but, I'm not a normal dude, frankly. And I get it. But they had come from all kinds of walks of life, and they finally felt like America was for them. And so that's why I always, you know what I mean? It's really something else to experience that. But as far as the charisma and everything else and the similarities between them, I think you're absolutely right. And but shifting gears in our conversation, because I could take off on that for a long time, but also, what is this all going to mean for the economy, for our economy, moving forward? And what should we have to look for, you think?
Yeah, look, I think it was interesting that the Feds cut the rates yesterday again. That's a great indication of obviously inflation is tamping down. I think if you want to get a sense of the economic picture of the next 4 years, look back at his first term. You know,
Yeah.
he prides himself on saying he made, you know, the largest tax cut in American history. And, you know, I think to be very honest, I think the Democrats need to change their messaging on this. They were very successful in using the message whenever a Republican president said, I'm going to cut taxes, it was always for the rich, always for the corporations.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think that message has lost impact and has been used too much by the Democratic Party because it doesn't translate to reality. And what you saw in 2016, 2017, when Donald Trump started cutting taxes is, look, you know, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure if companies have more money, if American citizens have more money, they typically spend more money. So you have disposable income is at a greater level. People feel more comfortable. And that economic, you know, encouragement is there and people are positive. Look, if the economy were even remotely better and Kamala had used arguments about, hey, this is what we've done for the economy. The problem that politicians have is everybody comes up with an economic plan. And when they implement their plan, and there were tenets of the plan, of Biden's plan that got implemented, the Green New Deal, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, we can argue the merits of that. But if that policy doesn't make you feel better as an American in terms of where I am, how much money I have to spend in my pocket, then it doesn't really matter. You're never going to connect with that voter. And that was, I think, one of the critical areas that Kamala failed at was articulating her vision economically moving forward, and then also what she and Biden did to help people while they were in office. And you can almost track, you know, the way a policy develops versus whether a president gets elected or reelected, obviously based on the economy. And while there were more issues that were important, or other issues, not more important, in this cycle, it still comes down to economy. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to personally have said, look, I want hope that I can be in a better position financially next time around. And if she had, this is, I think, a pivotal point, because if she had differentiated herself from Biden with a clear, concise economic plan, and she had done it early on, not, you know, kind of late in the campaign, I think she would have been able to close the gap, because that's what people were looking for. I can't tell you how many voters I've talked to that said, look, I wasn't going to vote for Trump, and I don't like him personally. When I went in to vote, I just couldn't vote for her. And I just want to believe, based on experience from the first administration, that he will turn the economy around.
You know, I want to add something there. I think we talked about it before. I mentioned a trip I made to Piccadilly, which is a local restaurant here in Fayetteville, on behalf of, get my mom some food. And that was when Vice President Harris was announced as the replacement, essentially, for Biden. And there was talk about the VP in line. And, you know, I've known Kamala since 2007, and Tony West, I've interviews with all of them, right? And so I said, vote for Kamala, right? And this is a predominantly Black audience. And the first comeback I got was, who is she? Yeah,
this is while she was sitting vice president.
Yeah, who is she? You know, and you know why? I mean, they didn't know, and it pointed to me a dramatic sea change in how African Americans view other candidates who are Black.
Right.
That, okay, that's not enough anymore. You know, you have to really have a message, be known, tell what you're going to do, you know, for us, but it has to be the economy. It can't be, well, okay, democracy is threatened, or all these other kind of maybe way off fringe discussions. Because look, the simple fact that we're talking and we're functioning where we are means we have a democracy, right?
Right.
You know, so it, and when I realized that we had this different type of question, I had to really take a hard look at something. I don't think we've it was predicted, but I don't think that we've come to grips with the fact that we as a group have finally reached that point where we have different ideologies, different ways of thinking, and we're not monolithic.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think that's also true for Latinos too. And so I, with all that, have to ask, having said all that, is this automatically going to spell also a change in the Republican Party as we move forward? What do you see? How do you see the party restructuring itself? Well, not either organically or by intent. You know.
Yeah. So it part of it goes to what I mentioned before. There's definitely a distinction between MAGA movement and Republican Party, and I think by far this is the most multicultural you could say that the Republican Party has represented. We have hit all-time highs, I believe, in every demographic versus other elections. You know, for as far back, I think George W. I think got 42% of the Hispanic the Latino community,
Right.
And so when you look at that, my hope is that Republicans don't take a victory lap. I hope that they see the results of this, see what it took to get there, and continue building on it. What I typically see is whether it's the Democrats or Republicans, whichever party loses, they're very adept and very good at figuring out how to beat the opposite party the next time around. And that's kind of what you've seen in the last couple of cycles. And so if the Republicans choose to be lazy, then I think they're going to lose a lot of the support. It goes back to what I said at the beginning. My biggest concern is, can another MAGA / Republican candidate do as well as Donald Trump did, given kind of where our country sits in a divided fashion? I think what we can say from this election is that policy did matter, issues mattered, and the more focus that was put on issues, I think the American people resonated with that more, and that's why that candidate won. Clearly, whoever the next Democratic leader will have a much more articulate message, no question, and probably be a much more effective communicator with that message. That's going to be interesting to see, because then it's a real competition.
I've got to ask you on having said that, and given what we talked about with Trump and his business background, wouldn't that person, that MAGA candidate, have to really have more of a business approach like Donald had with his message, as opposed to, something else? And because I think when I think of Donald, I think of also Ross Perot, authentic, yes. Right? Mm-hmm. Likable character, everything else. Didn't win, thought he was going to win. I think of Trump along those lines, but I also think of, again, the model of delivering a message that, as an entrepreneur, I glommed onto from The Apprentice. Have an objective, state your idea, make sure that everybody's singing the same song, repeat the message again and again and again. That's a standard pattern. Wouldn't they? I mean, what I hear you saying is, that's what I'm asking. Are you saying that they have to follow that pattern, or can they be another type of MAGA, or is there such a thing? I'm just curious.
So I think MAGA will evolve, just like most political parties evolve. I think which direction it goes in remains yet to be seen. I think that if Donald Trump has a lot of success because he's only serving one term, that's going to help JD Vance secure that heir apparent and carry the mantle forward. If Donald Trump doesn't get his policies implemented and people are frustrated, they're going to blame JD Vance, being the next on the ticket, almost as they did with Kamala. I think it's interesting you raise Ross Perot. Why couldn't Ross Perot, even though he got more of the vote than people expected, why couldn't he do better? And Donald Trump did. Obviously, there's a lot of dynamicism with the candidate, but I also think there are a lot of things in this election and actually in the last couple cycles that didn't apply. Party structure mattered a lot more. Hierarchy within the party, both Republican and Democrat, meant a lot more. Endorsements back then meant a lot more. All those things have, in my opinion, either been dismantled or weakened heavily. I don't think you can argue that endorsements really helped either of them. Maybe with the exception of Joe Rogan, because he was not for either one of them. And when he moved to one and just given his following, but you saw the effect. Taylor Swift, I think, had very little impact. I think the Democrats, and this is up to them, but I think that they will be foolish if they continue to believe that Hollywood stars are going to carry their platform moving forward. If I were the next Democratic, leader, I would think hard and serious about how I can best connect with working class Americans and who I use to do that. I think Donald Trump had a lot of good surrogates. Kamala had good surrogates too, but if you don't have a message, look at a couple of the situations Josh Shapiro is in. Yeah. He's a very smart, governor, very talented. Name a policy difference that Kamala is doing different from Biden, and it was kind of like, let me get back to you on that. And that I think should tell you a lot about how their entire strategy unfolded. So I think that I think moving forward, clearly there's nobody else like Donald Trump. How is that going to translate and impact the Republican Party? We'll get a good sense in 2 years when we hit the midterms, and to see how that paradigm shifts with American voters.
Curious to know. We talked about AI on the phone. Now, as much as you can say, okay, for all the reasons I've stated that way, I'll just cut to the chase. To what degree did artificial intelligence play a role in this victory?
Certainly a much more expanded role in both parties than the last two terms. And I think it'll even be more of an issue moving forward. I mean, obviously we saw the AI generated videos, ads, memes. It's going to be incredible to see. AI is going to be used. There's no doubt about it. We used it with our modeling. We used it with ads, with social media. Both sides are doing it. Typically, it's a race of who can get there first in making it most effective. I think one interesting anomaly this time, and I'm sure it'll continue, is in 2016 and even in 2020 to a large extent, we talked about influencers, and particularly kind of, the younger generation influencers who up until this point have stayed out of politics because it hurt their brand, it hurt their revenue. They just weren't interested in it. It was fascinating to see how many influencers on both sides there were this cycle, what they would do, the ads that they would put out. It was incredible. And I think you're going to continue to see that, moving forward. It's another reason why I think the Democrats were a little bit perplexed at how Donald Trump was able to capture a significant chunk of, voters under, 30.
It's interesting you said. I was actually invited to join what's called the DNC creator team. And the White House did have a social media kind of, contract. I wasn't invited, but I know Shira Lazar for years and I interviewed her. So I was, angry because reaching out. But my question is, to what extent do politicians, my experience with politicians in general is that they don't get digital media. And from your perspective, have you seen that, or is it changing? And the reason I ask is because you see a lot of influencers doing it, but I want to make a politician influence. I want that person to get up, make their own videos, pop out their own 2 minutes, right, and just be with the camera. And I can't get them to do it.
Yeah.
What's going on? You know,
It's fascinating. So that's a great question. So Donald Trump didn't understand it, but got it in 2016. He cut all kinds of ads that I have never seen a candidate cut before. Now, he didn't understand the science behind it, but given his media savvy and prowess and knowing the impact, when we sat down and explained, hey, we can do a 15 or 30-second ad on, you know, that it was Twitter or Facebook, you know, or TikTok, and it costs a fraction of what a traditional ad costs on television, and it can reach hundreds of thousands, if not millions of more people that much quicker. It's not too difficult. A business guy understands that. Most politicians don't understand that. Like I said, he was the first I've ever worked with that actually grasped the impact. Again, he may not have understood the technology or science behind it. JD Vance, on the other hand, completely different scenario. He got it. He understood it. He did it. And I think you're going to continue to see that, because what Donald Trump created in 2016 was the idea of connecting directly with the voters. And it doesn't get any better than that. Voters want to see and hear and feel and touch the candidate. They don't care about consultants, sound bites, campaign managers, you know, ads on TV. They want to hear directly from the individual. So that is going to be the model moving forward. You're going to see more candidates doing that, and we already have. Some are obviously going to do it better than others. I think as we continue to move forward with different generations, the newer generations have already and will continue to embrace it. And it will have a massive impact on the way that voters perceive and decide who they're going to vote for as candidates.
Hey, now the reality of Washington is that there are people. I remember I was on a Zoom about potentially working the Biden administration 4 years ago, and what struck me was that there were a number of people, different walks of life. One brother, he worked black, 7 different administrations straight through without, and you know what I'm talking about. That's very common, right? But the rest of the world doesn't know that. Okay, so my question is that essentially, how do you see the Trump administration shaping out? Are you going to be a part of it this time? What, you know, or technically, you never really stopped being a part of it, right? Because I know you're doing a lot of work and all that. But how do you see the administration shaping out in terms of staffing? And we have the first woman chief of staff. I believe you know her, right?
Yes. Yeah, I worked with Susie in 2016. A fantastic, capable, intelligent, organized, structured individual. She brought so much professionalism to the campaign. They were so successful, and she deserves every bit of the credit. And I'm very encouraged that she's in that role, because I think that she can do a lot from behind the scenes, which is what she likes to do, and she can be very impactful. Look, I think Donald Trump, more than probably anybody in his administration the first time around, learned a lot about government. He learned how it worked or didn't work. He learned the difficulty with the bureaucracy. He learned that it wasn't like a corporation, and you can't fire people if they're not performing efficiently, which is very frustrating from a business point of view. This time around, I think you're going to see a lot of outsiders. There has no secret. There has been a mission to de-swamp the swamp, to not use Washington insiders, to not use Washington bureaucrats. And the proof will be in the pudding. I mean, inevitably, some always slip through for a variety of reasons. But I certainly think that Donald Trump is going to make the decisions, where last time he was probably, getting too many people trying to whisper in his ear that they knew better. And that's not going to happen this time. I think it'll also be faster. You're already seeing it. I was kind of joking with a former colleague. Look at the time it took him to appoint Susie Wiles versus last cycle when we had, kind of a divide between Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon and who was going to get chief of staff, which took multiple weeks to resolve. You don't have that this cycle. And I think that kind of definitiveness is going to be a real asset for him. And he's going to get the people he wants. In the last term, he certainly got people that he wouldn't have picked if he knew everything about them, regardless of their experience.
That's a heck of a statement. Wow.
Yeah. And look, there's a trade-off to that, right? There are people that do have experience in Washington that in some cases can matter. It kind of goes along with, do we institute term limits? Great idea at first, but then you think, well, if we institute term limits, then who's going to take over? It's going to be the bureaucrats that really rule and lead. And we don't want that either. So there's certainly a balance, but I think when you think about how government works, he's putting it always into a business context, and he wants it to be as efficient and effective as possible. And that means having the right people at the helm, having people that also understand that as a secretary of a cabinet agency, you got bureaucrats that are going to try to slow you down. And they don't like change, as we all know. This is regardless of party. They like their, nice job with pension and recently remote work. We'll see if that changes. I think that'll be one of the most interesting things that changes. But I think it'll be a different approach. And look, think about this. This is kind of wild. Elon Musk, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, the list kind of goes on. And this is, I think, one of the strengths Donald Trump had in 2016 and he has now, is bringing these types of people in. It was fascinating when Biden picked his cabinet. I was certain he would have picked more non-Washington insiders, and he didn't. And I think that's part of the reason he got hamstrung in certainly some of the foreign policy that he did. Again, it's risk reward. And I think that, Donald Trump's willing to take those risks where other politicians wouldn't do it.
So as we near a close, I got to ask you, okay? Let's say crystal ball, fantasy, or maybe reality. The Democratic Party calls you and they want you to be their lead strategy consultant. You have your first meeting, and after giving their presentation, what they think happened, before you give your presentation, they ask you for your opinion and how you do think they should change. What are you going to say?
How much time do we have left?
Hey, you're the boss, man. We're not paying.
It's actually a really good question. That list is a lot longer than I'd say, in 2020, for Donald Trump on the opposite side. I think they have to start, back from square one in terms of who are we as a party? What do we represent as values? Who do we want to try to attract into that party? That's first and foremost. Two, you have to have a solid message. Running on abortion alone is not going to do it. Running on issues where you're attacking your opponent without presenting an alternative vision is not going to do it. I think that the Democrats will look at the next 2 years and they have two choices, right? I think, and you're already seeing a little bit of how it's going to turn out. The Democrats right now, there are some that are like, we're going to try to stop Donald Trump at every juncture. Going to be really hard to do, by the way, because he controls now, or likely will control both houses. That's not the right thing for the Democrats to do. They need to figure out how they can come up with a better message than what Donald Trump did. I thought it was very interesting in the campaign how Kamala did change several of her policy positions from previous years. There are not too many Democrats that talk about tax cuts. She was very smart to do that, right? Even if she stole the idea, no tax on tips, that's going to get you votes. When fracking, again, it was a smart strategic play for her to change her position on fracking, given that Pennsylvania was such a significant state. You take the hit on flip-flopping, and then you just dive in to that position. That's the type of stuff that the Democrats need to be thinking of. They need to get away from attacking Trump. It didn't work in 2016. It didn't work in 2024.
Right.
And that's a big one. If they start doing that, if they start moving back to those fundamentals, look, we've always, as Republicans, we've always been concerned, and we were, this time around, we got a lot of the early vote out, but the Democrats have always traditionally had a much better infrastructure machinery to turn out the vote than Republicans. What we saw this time, and you talked to enough Democrats, I'd be curious if they agree, is they didn't have enthusiasm. We both as parties spent same ample time, probably money. She had more money, all encouraging voters to go vote early. Why did so few Democrats do that when typically they do go out and vote early?
Right.
That's a big question. They've got to step back. So there are obviously very strategic things they need to look at that I just mentioned, but then they also need to look at how they're going to improve their infrastructure, because they do have a good foundation. They always have. But what could they have done differently this time around to create greater enthusiasm? Maybe it's better candidate, maybe it's better policy. Time will tell, but those are the things I would probably recommend that they start with right away.
Two things. First, doesn't that kind of poke a stick at the idea that the Democrats had a better ground game than Republicans? A. And then my other question is about Oakland, and it's that we recalled our mayor. We've had a terrible last 4 years economically, which has been communicated on social media millions of times. Given that Kamala is from our area, do you think that also had some impact in this election outcome?
So the second question first. Absolutely. I think that it was interesting how, I think because of the short time frame, how Democrats were able to kind of skip over her previous record. The only ones that I saw bringing it up were people from California. And some of them were fascinating. There were some pieces near the end about her father, the impact her father had on her ideology. That never really got out into the campaign, trail. I think that her record as a prosecutor hurt her. When politicians are caught on videotape, it's the hardest thing to try to go back and unwind. And she said some pretty impactful things, negatively impactful, I think, to voters. I think, again, in the ads that the Trump team did, pulling in some of these families that had, been impacted by her decision as a prosecutor, mind-blowing from my perspective. Real, people could understand it, people could see it. She just didn't, I think, have the best approach in terms of what she really wanted to do. What was her goal? What was her mission? Sure, it's to win, but you just don't win. You got to work to win.
Aren't you surprised they didn't scout themselves and say, hey, look, we do work on boom, 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 and have a counter?
Oh, absolutely. We found it fascinating because there are obviously many smart Democratic operatives. And we kept wondering along the way, we're like, man, that's really unusual that they would allow themselves to do this. And I got one reply by a pretty senior profile Democrat that said, look, a lot of these recommendations we are making, her campaign's not taking. Okay, that's fair. I mean, that happens with all candidates. They just don't believe in the direction of some of the advice. You're the decision maker. That it's your prerogative. But I think as we peel back the layers of this election, that's exactly what people are going to do. They're going to say, well, wait a minute. I've heard over the last couple of days, Kamala Harris ran a flawless campaign. I still, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, where you're in the first stage of denial. So maybe they'll come to grips with, like, it wasn't a flawless campaign. If it was, she would have won. And when they decide to break that apart and really think critically about where they went wrong in an analytical way, not a political way, then I think that will be the turning point for them of when they start rebuilding. But until they get to that point, pointing the fingers at each other, it's not going to help.
No, I agree. So, hey, that is about an hour, and I'm going to stop it right there out of respect for my friend's time so I don't get killed. Rick, we got to have you back. That was a lot of fun to really recap. There was a lot of information I hope people will unpack and really think about. We'll take segments out of this and present it again. Any closing thoughts you want to share before we sign off?
Well, look, I know it's been a very divisive election. Yeah, I say a lot of times it's understandable to have different policies, policy positions. My hope is, win or lose, regardless of the political party, is that we can all get behind, whoever the president is. And you may not agree with the policies, but as a country, we've got to learn to start coming back together. I thought Joe Biden had a great line in his speech about that yesterday, where he said, regardless of winning or losing, this is about our country. And he is right. And I think that the more that we can do that, I think elections are getting too emotional, and we need to kind of step back and recognize. And I tell people this all the time. My sincere belief is, the more that we wreck ourselves from within, this is exactly what our adversaries want. Nobody's talking about how China, Russia, and Iran and North Korea are undermining our democracy. That is their single primary goal. And the more that we do that from within, we're just helping them do that. I think that we can disagree. We can be respectful, one another. Republicans are going to lose in the future. Democrats are going to lose in the future. The key is to make sure, and as all Americans, we want the best country, that we can have. And there will always be disagreements on vision and policy ideas to achieve that. But at the end of the day, it's my hope that we can at least put aside the emotional part of that and at least come to learn to respect, one another.
Hey, Ray. Oh, by the way, do you want to announce your company for this round? How people can get in touch with you if they need to hire you as a consultant?
Oh yeah, the name of my company is Tungsten LLC. I'm on Rick W. Gates on X and I think every other social media platform. Any questions, anything, let me know. It's going to be an interesting process over the next 73 days. I think we're in now, 72 maybe, to the inauguration. That'll be the next phase of all this, and I think it'll go very quickly.
Rick, hey, stick around in the background, folks. Thank you so very much for consistently watching this over the stream. We've had as many as 10 watching at a time, which is great, considering that, hey, we were doing more. We were really going into the weeds of some things, which is what I love. And again, Rick, thanks a lot. We'll have you back. That ends the stream, folks. Subscribe to Zennie62 on YouTube. Oh, and by the way, bookmark ZennieReport.com and our newest one, CES LasVegasNews.com. CES is coming up. All right. Stick around. I got this. That ends the stream, folks. Thanks a lot.